Hello everyone. Welcome. Here we are today again, back one more time before the end of 2020 with America's Test Kitchen and Chief Creative Officer Jack Bishop. It is so wonderful to see Jack again. He was with us for one of our very first Bookshop virtual events ever back in September. So it's so good to have Jack back now. So we are here for a very important topic right now as we head into this historic holiday quarantine season, obviously, which is always a difficult time to remain healthy and to cook well. And yet here we are with an additional challenge of never really being able to leave our houses during this time now as we head into holiday season and winter up here in the Northern Hemisphere. So Jack is going to talk to us today about the Complete Plant-Based Cookbook from America's Test Kitchen. And we are so excited because I know I will be looking forward to making so much of this. And if you are with us live right now, you're actually going to receive an email afterwards with not one, not two, but 3 recipes from the Complete Plant-Based Cookbook from America's Test Kitchen after this event closes. So that's something to look forward to as well. Very exciting. So I'm going to go and do a little intro about Bookshop here and then give a brief bio about Jack and all of his accomplishments. And then I'm going to go away and Jack will talk about how to have some really creative, imaginative ideas for your vegetables and plant-based diet that you probably haven't even ever thought about and what surprised him and some of his favorite tricks. And then we're going to be taking Q&A about 25 to 30 minutes in. So if you're with us live, of course, please just share the Q&A below. When your icon, you can see at the bottom of the screen here, if you're with us live. And if you're with us recorded, obviously you can't, I'm sorry. But if you are with us live, again, we're vetting questions in real time. So please just know we can't get through all of them. And we really appreciate your understanding if we cannot get through the questions completely today. So that said, let's talk about Bookshop a little bit. And just a reminder that this is recorded so that you can find it later on our Bookshop YouTube channel, where we have all of our previous America's Test Kitchen video events there too, which are all great and wonderful. And again, we have one other with Jack as well. So this is the second event with us here. So speak about Bookshop briefly, then we'll talk about wonderful Jack Bishop, our guest here today. And then we will have him just tell you all about these wonderful plant-based recipes and do Q&A about 30 minutes in. So first, a word about Bookshop. So just a reminder that every purchase you make on Bookshop directly supports independent bookstores. Bookshop is an online bookstore with a mission to financially support independent stores because we believe that bookstores are essential to a healthy culture, that where authors can connect with readers, where we discover new writers, and where children get hooked on the thrill of reading that can last a lifetime. And of course, they're anchors for our downtowns and our communities, especially now. And as more and more people buy books online, even before quarantine happened earlier this year, we wanted to create an easy, convenient way for you to get books and support bookstores at the same time, especially from those stores whose e-commerce capacity and or inventory space we at bookshop.org can help supplement. So as a standard at Bookshop, we always encourage customers to buy books directly from your local bookstore whenever possible. And if for some reason you can't do so, you can come to bookshop.org. You can find your local store and more stores on our map there on our website, and they'll receive the full profit off your order. Otherwise, your order will contribute to an earnings pool that will be evenly distributed among independent stores, even those that don't use Bookshop. So we also want to mention we have a free affiliate program. So anyone who advocates for books gets 10% commission on every sale through your affiliate page. So if you have a book club, if you're an organization, whether you're just one single person or a media outlet, we want to support everyone who gives back to the thriving culture around books and bookstores. So please look into our free affiliate program as well and start your affiliate page today. By design, Bookshop gives away over 75% of our profit margin to stores, publications, authors, and others who make up the culture around books. So we do hope Bookshop can strengthen the fragile ecosystem and margins around book selling and keep local bookstores an integral part of our culture and our communities, especially now, especially in the holiday season of 2020, where they need you to really help keep the doors open and move into a strong 2021. Bookshop is a benefit corporation, a corporation dedicated to the public good. So without further ado, let's talk about Jack Bishop, our guest today. Jack Bishop is the Chief Creative Officer of America's Test Kitchen. He was part of the original team that started America's Test Kitchen, beginning with the launch of Cooks Illustrated in 1993. Jack directed the launch of Cooks Country magazine in 2005 and the building of the company's book division as well. As if that wasn't enough, he also is a tasting lab expert on America's Test Kitchen and Cook's Country. Jack leads the creative teams working on the company's television shows, podcasts, videos, magazines, books, and online cooking school. Jack is the author of several cookbooks, including Vegetables Every Day. So again, he's the person to talk to about the Complete Plant-Based Cookbook, the Complete Italian Vegetarian Cookbook, and Peyton Picks the Perfect Pie, and most recently, Cooking for One, which he helps support as well, which we had an event for back in September. And you can purchase, of course, all of these on bookshop.org, and then also in the webpage that we share at the end of this event too. So finally, again, without any further delay for real this time, I'm very pleased to introduce Jack Bishop of America's Test Kitchen. And again, Jack, if you want to take it away, I will go away for now, and then everyone will submit their questions about 30 minutes.
Great, thanks, Angela, and really excited to be with the Bookshop audience and to support the good work. As you can probably tell, I'm in my home kitchen. I'm in New York, so the sun's about ready to set here on the East Coast, so we still have some daylight going. As Angela mentioned, I've actually written 3 vegetarian cookbooks back in the late 90s and early 2000s. And so this is something I've been passionate about for several decades. My colleagues at America's Test Kitchen, we've actually written 2 books on the subject. Back in 2015, we wrote a vegetarian cookbook. In 2017, we published a vegan book, and they were really successful. And our audience has asked for more recipes, so hundreds of brand new recipes in the Complete Plant-Based Cookbook. But I think from an editorial and creative perspective, we really feel like the landscape has so dramatically shifted in terms of ingredients, and especially with plant-based dairy, plant-based milks, plant-based meats, which I'm going to get in a little bit about all the testing that we've done in that area, because of course that's one of the things that we do in the Test Kitchen. A little bit about the book and our philosophy. So every single recipe, and I think there are 570 recipes in the book, is written to give you options. So one of the things that we do at America's Test Kitchen is we have a panel of 70,000 home cooks who we're constantly surveying and asking questions. And the number one thing we heard about this book was that people wanted choices. And so every recipe is written to be vegan, with notes and variations if you want to use animal products. So for instance, if you want to add eggs to a dish, or if you want to use dairy milk or plant-based milk, you'll get guidance about that. And what we've done, and what that we do, is that if we tell you that we've tested the recipe with both plant-based milks and dairy milk, that you have some really high-level confidence that whatever you're going to use is going to work based on the guidance that we're providing with folks in the pages of the book. Vegetables are the star in every recipe. We're finding that the audience is really a mix of folks who are making a permanent lifestyle change, folks who are decided that meat is no longer part of the diet, as well as, and this audience is probably even larger, folks who are like, I want to eat less meat. I want to eat fewer animal products, and really want to eat, whether it's meatless Mondays, becoming also meatless Tuesdays and Wednesdays, folks who want to eat, no meat during the week. We hear it all. And so what we really wanted to do in the book was provide recipes that would work for people who are eating no animal products whatsoever. And for those of you who are occasionally, are perfectly fine using, egg-based mayonnaise instead of plant-based mayonnaise, that we've tested recipes and provided guidance for you. So anyway, that's a little bit of the sort of framework. We had 8 people in the kitchen developing recipes. This is the way you guys probably know, with book cycles, we were largely done. This is a pre-pandemic book when we were all working together in our offices in Boston. Our team has been home developing recipes in their home kitchens, which has been interesting since March. But this is one of the last projects we got done before the pandemic sent us all back to our home kitchens. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about plant-based meat, because I think this is uh, maybe the most sort of newsy, exciting portion of this. And I gotta say, I was pretty skeptical. It was probably just about 12 months ago, we did a large tasting of all of these products out there. And I gotta tell you that, I always thought veggie burgers were just, especially commercial based. I mean, I think they're great homemade options, but the homemade options are really a lot of work. And the commercial versions, frankly, for many, many really decades, have been awful. I mean, I wouldn't serve them. I mean, it just felt like very sad, gray, not very flavorful things that were for folks who had any memory of something that tasted good. This was not something that was going to work for them. That has totally changed. And I think I really, when we did this tasting, it was actually in the summer of 2019. And we made tacos, so we made hamburgers, burger patties, and put them on buns, and served them mostly to people who were carnivores, and who were like, you know what, this is every bit as good as the burger that I'm used to eating. Two brands in particular really stood out: the Impossible Burger from Impossible Foods and Beyond Beef. I will say that the Impossible Burger was the favorite. Unfortunately, it's pretty hard to get. I would say, at least where I am locally, I really see the Beyond Beef everywhere, and I basically don't see the Impossible Burger all that often in my supermarkets. What both of these products are doing is replicating the color, the texture, and the sort of consistency of ground beef. They both have a lot of fat in them. I mean, they're nutritionally pretty similar, actually, to ground beef, and remarkably versatile. I would say I've done a lot of work at home cooking with the Beyond Beef. Two things that I've noticed, just as a sort of general note, and that is reflected in a lot of our recipes. It's a little on the sweet side, and has a little hint of smokiness. The smokiness is sort of neither here nor there. I mean, I use it a lot in things like taco fillings, or pasta dishes, and it's just sort of an additional note. The sweetness is something that often I want to amp up, both the acidity and the umami. And so adding soy sauce or tomato paste or something else that's got a really strong savory note to sort of balance the fact that it seems a little on the sweet side. I would say the Impossible Burger is not so much, doesn't really have those sweet notes, and is just sort of out and out savory. The Impossible Burger is a soy based. The Beyond Beef is pea protein, which you're seeing in a lot of these plant-based products, from mayonnaise to beef, which is like it sounds. They extract the protein from dried yellow peas, and are using that as the base for so many of these ingredients. Couple things if you're going to cook either of these brands as sort of a straight up burger. Yes, they change color so that they're sort of pinkish, and then eventually go to gray, but they do that faster than other ground meats, especially ground beef. And so you really want to be using temperature rather than sort of peeking in and looking at it, because you're probably going to miss cook it if you are looking at sort of the interior color. The temperature that we're suggesting is actually cook them to medium. These meats can be a little pasty if they're on the rare side. So if they're cooked at 120 or 125, temp you'd use to cook a rare burger would probably be 120. They're really kind of mushy and pasty. Likewise, they really dry out on the well done side. So if you cook them to 150 or 160, which would be the equivalent of a well done beef burger, they're going to be pretty dry. So somewhere in that 130, 135 range is going to be a better option. What's really amazing here is that each of these brands has a different formula for producing this. They're using, for Impossible, something, it's called a hemiprotein that is extracted from legumes. but functions like the compounds in beef that create the browning, the Maillard reaction. So you get just this incredible crust, which I think is maybe the biggest difference. I think about those sad, like garden burgers from like 1980s, vegetarian cookouts, which if you got them off the grill, I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, because like it was a good thing because they were no longer on the grill, but if you got them off the grill, it meant you had to eat them. And they were just like, they just weren't that satisfying, and they didn't have the sort of textural contrast that you expect from a really great grilled burger. So there are a lot of recipes in the book where we are, everything from Mexican dishes, Italian dishes, to straight up, burgers with a cheese with a Z sauce that's obviously not made with dairy cheese, that are in the book to really get people excited about what's a really big development. And I think there's more in the pipeline. We know that a lot of these companies are working on replicas for other ground meats, especially pork. And, the technology's interesting, to say the least. The second thing that's really changed a lot is dairy. And, again, somebody who's been, I have been on and off a vegetarian for 30 years. I'm on an on cycle now. But it meant soy milk. That was the choice. And soy milk's fine in some applications, but now there are literally a dozen non-dairy milks at many supermarkets. And so a couple of things that we found, oat milk has the highest sugar content and therefore is our top choice for baking. So any whether it's a muffin, a cake, pancakes, any recipe that you want milk that's a baked good, oat milk is our top choice. For that reason, for savory dishes, because it's got a high level of sugar, relatively speaking, it's not really the best choice. We prefer like almond milk for savory dishes. If you're trying to make the equivalent of a white sauce, for instance, let's say you're making a bechamel, with flour and coconut oil rather than butter, which would be a great option. That with oat milk, it's going to be a little weird because it's going to be a little sweet, but it would be great with almond milk. Soy milk has a little bit of a beany flavor, so it's not quite as neutral as almond, but it really works well as a sort of option in any of those recipes. I think we're less enthusiastic about the coconut milk. It kind of didn't, one of the things about the oat milk, because it has all the sugar, is it browns really well. And so you get, your pancakes brown, your muffins brown. When we use the coconut milk, things didn't brown all that well because the sugar content's lower. And it's fine in savory options, but I think the almond and soy are stronger. And then rice milk, which actually we feel like commercial rice milks are sort of a last option here. They're just really too watery, and we didn't really get great results in those. So, a couple of brands in particular that we loved in the kitchen. There's so many, we didn't really do a side-by-side tasting because there are literally like 100 brands out there, but we use the Oatly original plant-based beverage, the Silk unsweetened almond milk, the So Delicious organic unsweetened coconut milk, and the Silk unsweetened organic soy milk. So those are all options. Yogurt, which is actually a much sort of newer development. Same deal. There's yogurts now made from so many different ingredients. We felt like the yogurts were better than the sour creams. And in fact, recipes where you might want to use sour cream, we think you should just be using a plant-based yogurt. Favorites were made with coconut milk, So Delicious coconut milk, unsweetened plain yogurt, 365, which is almond milk, or Blue Diamond, which is also made with almond milk. Really great yogurts. And I would say even brands that we weren't necessarily loving straight from the container, worked really well in sauces and again in baked goods. And so we were really pleasantly surprised about how well the sort of current generation of plant-based yogurts performed in the kitchen. And if you're thinking you dip a spoon in and you're sort of underwhelmed, cook with it. Add it to a muffin batter, add some herbs and garlic and make a tzatziki with it, and you're going to be pleasantly surprised. Creamers. So these are basically high-fat dairy that that are being used in place of half and half. We liked the Forager brand, and that's a cashew milk coconut cream, and the Khalifa, which is also almond and coconut milk. And again, for those applications where we wanted something that was closer to heavy cream or half and half, these plant-based creamers are really, really good options. So, two sort of building block recipes that I want to just give a shout out to, and then I'm going to give you some actual sort of sell some favorite recipes in the book and sort of describe them to you. But I think two things I hear a lot from folks who are trying to eat a vegan plant-based diet is, what do you do about broth? What do you do about all those things that you want to sprinkle Parmesan over? The reality of vegetable broth, store-bought vegetable broth, is largely devoid of flavor. And many of the brands that have flavor are really sweet. They taste like all carrots, and they are really not great options. They also, many of the brands have a lot of ingredients that you can't pronounce and are pretty far from what you would make at home. The problem is making really good vegetable broth is super time consuming. And so that's why a couple of years ago in the test kitchen, we invented a vegetable broth base that's a no-cook base that you keep in the freezer and reconstitute when you need it. And so you basically take a select number of vegetables, leeks and carrots and celery root and fresh parsley. Use dried minced onions because we're going to freeze it, and the onions didn't really freeze very well. Salt, tomato paste, and soy sauce. And the salt's really important here because you put it all in the food processor, you grind it into this super intense paste, and then you can freeze it. And because there's enough salt in there, you can scoop out spoons as you need it. So you don't need to defrost it. So you can make one big batch, scoop out how much you need, and then reconstitute it with hot water. So it's a lot like those broth bases that are sold in the supermarket, except I just read the ingredient list to you, and it's all natural. And it is 10 times better than any store-bought broth. You can make one large batch that's enough, for 7 quarts of broth. It takes 5 minutes, maybe 10, if you're going to throw in the time to wash everything and chop everything, and you do it in the food processor. So I really recommend making a homemade vegetable broth base, and the recipe that's in the book is spectacular. The other thing is Parmesan. So I grew up with an Italian American grandmother. Italian food is my first, my second, and maybe my third love. And, it's really hard to think about so many of those great pasta dishes that we love that are naturally plant-based. What do you do when you want to serve them at the table if you are not eating Parmesan? And I would say, I think there have been improvements in plant-based cheeses. They're not at the level quite of plant-based other milks or yogurts at this point. So we actually came up with thinking about this from a different perspective in the test kitchen about what is the function of grated Parmesan that you're sprinkling over a bowl of pasta alla vodka, and came up with something that's got cashews, nutritional yeast, pine nuts, chopped green olives, and salt. And again, you process everything, you dry it in the oven until it's lightly crispy, and then you can sort of sprinkle it over things, and you're getting the texture, you're getting the saltiness, you're getting the umami that you would typically get from Parmesan. In something that you've made, again, you can make in large batches. that is not designed to necessarily, you wouldn't taste it and say, oh, that's Parmesan. That's not really the goal. I mean, obviously those ingredients, you know, it's going to taste, it's going to remind you of cashews or olives, but it's thinking about the function. And I think sometimes that's a better way to think about if you're, you know, if you have a favorite recipe from your mom or your grandmom that you want to sort of adapt, rather than thinking, oh, it's got this ingredient and I want to come up with the plant-based analog, is to think about like, well, how am I going to rebuild this recipe? Think about the function of the ingredients. So 3 recipes that I want to sort of just give a shout out to. So the cover recipe, actually made this Monday night. It is Baja style cauliflower tacos. And so, you know, what can't cauliflower do? It might just be the best vegetable out there. The cauliflower is dipped in coconut milk and then coated in panko breadcrumbs and unsweetened shredded coconut, and then baked in the oven on a sheet tray. And it's basically the star with a simple slaw that's got mango and cabbage, and then a plant-based yogurt cilantro sauce. And it is the recipe that's on the cover. You can add pickled radishes, lime wedges. It is so good, so good. The cauliflower is spectacular. And I think it has all of the things that you kind of love about a great taco, which is there's a lot of interesting things going on from a texture perspective, from a flavor perspective, and is a star recipe. I mean, it's not only beautiful, which is why we put it on the cover of the book, but it's simple and it's absolutely delicious. Second favorite recipe for me in the book is green shakshuka. Now I know you're thinking, okay, like isn't that supposed to have eggs? And there's a note in the book if there's a version that if you want to add and poach eggs in it, but honestly, it doesn't need it. But it's reimagining it. And so rather than the tomato-based, this is, leafy greens, and thinking about, creating all those flavors with Swiss chard, baby spinach, lots of onions, garlic, coriander, and just really, it's just an absolutely delicious, vegetable dish that has the sort of spices and flavors of shakshuka, but in a really fresh, interesting, new take. It is a great brunch dish, weekend breakfast, as well as obviously a great dinner recipe. Last recipe that I'm going to just give you a shout out is, I mentioned, I grew up with an Italian grandma who made a lot of spaghetti and meatballs. And this is a recipe that we, again, thinking about how do we build a meatless meatball. And we started with vegan protein crumbles, TVP, and then added cremini mushrooms and eggplant. Again, thinking about savoriness. Mushrooms are a particularly good source of umami. That compound, remember they're the 5 tastes: sweet, sour, bitter, salty, and umami. That's that thing that we call savoriness that has, that's in mushrooms, tomatoes, anchovies. Those are all things that are rich in umami. It's just, we used a little bit of, rather than eggs, the recipe uses aquafaba, the leftover liquid from a can of chickpeas, to bind the meatballs. And it is, it's every bit as good as the spaghetti and meatballs that I grew up enjoying as a little kid. So that's just a little taste of why I'm so excited about the Complete Plant-Based Cookbook. I'm love to answer questions. So if you have questions for me, please, let me know. And so let me jump in here. Anne asks, aren't products like plant-based meats, plant-based milks, still processed foods subject to additives and other processes that compromise the integrity and nutritional benefits of the actual natural plants? Yeah, I mean, you know, as I sort of said at the beginning, one of the things that we're really interested in is giving people choices. There's nothing natural about plant-based meat. I mean, I think we can just stipulate that. But I think, you know, and that, you know, but for, you know, for instance, I have two daughters. One is a carnivore and one is a vegan. And so plant-based meats allow me to satisfy both of my adult children. And the carnivore is totally happy to have tacos made with plant-based meat. And obviously, so is our vegan. So I think, you know, we're really into giving people information so that they can make the choices that are right for them, you know, with the notion that not all of these choices may be right for you, is I guess how I would answer that. Veggie burgers. So this comes from Carol. What if you prefer the taste of vegetable or bean-based burgers? Any recommendations for store-bought options? You know, the Beyond Beef patties come already in patty form, and I think if you want to buy, you know, burgers, I think those are probably the best. I mean, you know, I wouldn't say they taste like vegetables, but they have they have the best texture because they brown the best, and they are not mushy, which I think is really the problem. So I don't know if I'm not a fan of the ones that are super beany. I mean, I feel like if I want a really beany burger, honestly, I'll take a can of chickpeas and put it in the food processor and, you know, and make my own bean burgers from chickpeas. Bridget asks, many vegan recipes I've cooked are high in sodium. What are some of your favorite low sodium vegan recipes? Yeah, I mean, so listen, salt is a way to build flavor. And so I think a lot of vegan recipes compensate for this. So the first thing is to, for low sodium, is to use, you know, low sodium products. So for instance, if you're buying canned beans, canned tomatoes, that, you know, there's so much sodium hidden in a lot of those, and to buy either no salt or low salt versions is really important. The second thing is to really, you know, think about how to build more flavor without salt. And it's usually spices, fresh herbs, and I think the most importantly, acidity. So I think a lot of people taste their food and think, you know, when they're ready to serve it, oh, that needs some more salt. It doesn't, you know, it's a little dull. It doesn't need salt. It needs acidity. So it needs lemon juice, it needs lime juice, it needs a drizzle of sherry vinegar or balsamic vinegar. And so I think one of the things that I always suggest to folks is to like use way less salt if you're, you know, if you're on a low sodium diet than recipes call for, and just think about that finishing, because, and that finishing not only is acidity, but that can be a drizzle of really great extra virgin olive oil, which can add so much impact, and is, you know, it's adding fat, but it's not adding sodium. It can be a sprinkle of cilantro or mint, or as I say, a squirt of lemon juice or lime juice. And so I think you're thinking about how to finish the food with something other than salt, and also making sure that when you're using canned products, canned beans, canned broth, canned tomatoes, that you're sticking with the low sodium or no salt options here. Let's see. Kathy asks, I love Worcestershire sauce, but the vegan versions are awful. Do you have any suggestions for a vegan substitute? Yeah, I mean, this is really, I would say, you know, thinking again about what Worcestershire sauce really does, is I think we've had better luck sort of cutting soy sauce with some lime juice or lemon juice to get some of that sort of tang in it. You're not going to get there. I mean, there's so much else in Worcestershire sauce that you know, that it's pretty hard to think about what's going to really replace that. It's a really tough one, and I think it's better to think about how do you add more spice, how do you add more acidity, and how do you add more salt to the dish. Zach asks about preferred vegan butters. So sort of two answers there. So for butter. I mean, I would say of the brands that I've personally tasted, and we've done a couple of tastings in the kitchen. The Miyoko's, I think, comes the closest. Their cultured butter to really good European style butter, and it is remarkably close. I think, and that's for like thinking about um, a butter sauce or butter on toast. For baking, I gotta tell you, I think coconut oil, virgin coconut oils, because you don't want it to really taste. You probably don't want your cake to taste like coconut, especially does really such a good job of replicating in pie doughs and cookies and cakes the sort of properties of butter. And so coconut oil is a really good option. Another question sort of related from Maria: I often see coconut oil being used in vegan recipes, which I don't like. Can olive oil be used, or is there something about the coconut oil that works better? So in any sort of savory application, where you're sauteing, these oils are largely interchangeable. Coconut oil, we like avocado oil, olive oil. I think the big thing there is that if you're going to be cooking with it, just be careful that some of these oils can start to smoke at relatively low temperatures, and they're really better, especially if they're unrefined oils. They're really better for finishing foods, for drizzling foods, rather than sort of high heat sauteing. But I think if you're seeing a recipe that calls for coconut oil that is, where you're using the oil for cooking, you can use olive oil. If it's a baking one and you don't like the taste, make sure you're getting the refined coconut oil, and so that something that doesn't actually smell like copper tone. I mean, I love suntan lotion, but if you open it up and it smells like suntan lotion, well, that's what you're going to get in your food, and that's probably not what you want. Anne asks for advice about using tofu. So a couple things. Firm is the most versatile. I used to like extra firm, but I kind of have come to prefer the sort of slightly creaminess. The extra firm can get really kind of rubbery. Second thing about tofu is, to blot it dry. I don't really think you need to weight it or press it, but I think the most important thing, and it's usually if I'm cooking tofu, the first thing I do is I take the block out of the water. I slice it usually either into cubes or into 8 slabs. So if I'm just typically going to be sort of braising it or pan sauteing it, I just will cut it crosswise into 8 slabs. Put it on towels, put more towels on top, and put it aside for 20 or 30 minutes while you're doing everything else, and then gently press on those towels to get as much moisture out. I think if you're going to be cutting it into cubes, thinking about coating it in a mixture of, so let's say you want something that's really crispy, a mixture of 50% cornstarch and 50% cornmeal, and just sort of giving it a little bit of texture. Sometimes we'll do that in saucier dishes. Honestly, I just love it, browned on both sides. Often we'll do a technique that I've seen in a number of Korean cookbooks of, rather than sort of putting a sauce on, to make a really super thick, rich paste that they then spread over each piece when it's been cooked, and then put the lid on the skillet and let it sort of flavor the tofu for the last couple of minutes. So, with gochujang and with sesame seeds and with scallions and garlic and ginger. And rather than a super saucy, it's more like a tablespoon or 2 of sauce that goes on each one, and then letting it sort of finish cooking with under the lid. And it's delicious. I love tofu, especially if we're talking about soups. That's when you want to be using soft or I think better still, silken tofu. But those are really meant for applications where you want the tofu to fall apart, or to be really super creamy And so, yeah. Let's see, Emily, do you have recommendations for cooking using spices, flavorings that go with turmeric to provide more health benefits? Yeah, turmeric. So, turmeric it's everywhere. I mean, it has a long tradition in, obviously, especially in Indian cooking. It's a root like ginger or galangal, but that we typically consume it dry and ground into a powder. It's used now in a lot of, golden lattes. It is the sort of backbone of many curry powders, what gives them their yellow color. And so, I think using it in, the best way to use turmeric is in curries, and both Indian as well as Thai curries. And, I think turmeric has sort of a grassy bitterness to it. So I think in excess, it can be a lot, but it works. It needs big flavors. So a lot of garlic, a lot of ginger, a lot of acidity, a lot of lime juice to stand up to it. Seems like it's really important. Question from Zana, do you have any favorite recipes to help convert small kids who like white foods, carb-heavy pasta, cheese, into bean and veggie eaters? So, so my kids are in their 20s. So, I'm on the other side, but I will tell you, I had two very thoughtful children when it came to food. One of them is probably can hear me in the other room. She was actually the easier one to please. Her older sister was a more challenging kid. And I think the experts will tell you, and I've really found this in my own case, two strategies. One is, if at first you don't succeed, try again and again and again. And that for a lot of kids, they need multiple introductions to something for it to be familiar. And so the second thing is don't push it, and that it's on the table. And if you're enjoying it, eventually your kids will. I found simple stuff, like, for instance, always roasting the vegetable, whatever that vegetable is, because roasting makes vegetables sweeter without adding any sugar, just caramelizes the natural sugars in the vegetables. And that, trying to get kids to eat and get excited about stir-fried broccoli with a really interesting sauce may be more challenging than just simply cutting the broccoli into nice sized pieces, tossing it with good olive oil, and roasting it in a hot oven on a baking sheet. And so I think sometimes thinking about small steps and simple stuff. I think also thinking about getting the kids in the kitchen, because I think that's a big thing. And whether that's allowing kids to finish foods, I think a lot of times thinking about having the sauces, the condiments, whatever that may be on the table, and letting the kids at least finish their foods, or better still, in the kitchen helping, that's a really, really important part of getting your kids excited about cooking. Melissa asks, how many of the recipes in the book are whole foods based, as opposed to recipes that are replicating meat recipes and or using heavier processed ingredients? I would say 80% of the recipes are what I would call straight up vegetable celebrations, bean and grain celebrations, and that the minority are recipes that are sort of trying to come up with analogs for things that maybe meat. I mean, last night I made a recipe from the book that was really delicious. It was basically a bowl. So you cooked lentils with some spices and onions in some water until basically they were just slightly saucy. This was green lentils depuis. Roasted some broccoli, just olive oil, salt on a sheet pan. Lemony breadcrumbs. So toasted breadcrumbs in a skillet, but added a little bit of grated lemon zest to them. And then as a sort of finishing accompaniment in that same skillet, once you toasted the breadcrumbs, you put them in a bowl, a couple tablespoons of really cheap, not very good balsamic vinegar that are then reduced down to a syrup, you know, like the really good expensive stuff, to drizzle over the bowl, and the lentils went on the bottom, the broccoli up next, the crunchy breadcrumbs, and then a sort of drizzle of you know, the balsamic vinegar. And so you know, I think that's that's a sort of good example of interesting ways of thinking about how to take you know, whole foods. In this case, it's a lentil and broccoli recipe, and making something super exciting and super tasty. So and one last question. You guys have been asking so many questions. Let's see. Let me see what I can find here. Caitlin's asking, what is the prep time, cook time, yeah. So we have a fast label in the book for any of the recipes that can be made start to finish, and that includes like washing the vegetables, chopping the vegetables in 45 minutes or less. And so you can see throughout the book that, you know, all of those recipes are flagged for you so that those are easy to find. And, you know, there are several hundred of those that, you know, everyone's quick has a different definition. I personally, especially in quarantine, I'm more on active time than total time, you know, since I'm perfectly happy to chop something up and put it in a pot or put it in the oven and then walk away for 45 minutes. And if there's less hands-on time and it's a longer start to finish, but I think those fast recipes are all 45 minutes or less. And I'd say it's about a third of the book is recipes that hit that. And I would say the majority that don't hit that are, you know, closer to an hour or so, with the exception of things like, you know, recipes with dried beans and things like that that are going to take longer. So super fun hanging out with all of you. I appreciate, you know, you participating in virtual events and, you know, spending a little bit of time learning a little bit about what we have been doing at America's Test Kitchen and with our complete plant-based cookbook. You know, I really want to thank Bookshop. You know, it's such a great organization, and I think everything we can do to support our local bookstores that we need to be doing. And I think this is a great way to do that. And, you know, I just wish for everybody to stay safe, to stay healthy, to take care of yourselves, take care of the people around you and your communities, and, you know, find some time to cook. That, you know, I think for a lot of people, cooking has been a real respite and refuge, and a place where also you can feel like you've got a little bit of control in a world where it feels like there's not much control left. And where you can do something good. And so, you know, cook something for yourself, cook something for neighbors, for people that that you live with. And, you know, again, thanks so much to the folks at Bookshop for setting this up. And everyone stay well and be well. And thanks again for spending some time this afternoon together.